So the Supreme Court recently granted review to the next big Second Amendment case, and once again it deals with state concealed carry restrictions and laws passed in direct defiance to what the Supreme Court said in their 6-3 ruling in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. So let's talk about what is now happening in this critical case. Now, before we jump into this video, if you guys want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to subscribe. Also, double check to make sure YouTube is not unsubscribed you. And then you can check out the podcast, the audio version of these if you want. I'll have a link to those down below in the details section, also in the pinned comment. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be talking about a two-way case that is set to be decided by the Supreme Court this term. And once again, it deals with state concealed carry restrictions. This case we're talking about is called Woolford versus Lopez, and it's huge for everyone in states like New York, New Jersey, California, Hawaii, Maryland, and others who are currently living under these laws that were passed in direct defiance to what happened in Bruin. Recently, to the surprise of many, the Trump DOJ and AG Bondi actually stepped up in support of this challenge, and they called these state concealed carry laws unconstitutional. That may have ultimately also helped to get the Supreme Court to take review of these cases, to take review of the case, and then also break the track record of just simply denying any review to these emergency two-way cases. And once again, in this challenge, the Trump DOJ has stepped up in support of it, and they are now also seeking to join the arguments in the Supreme Court, which is going to happen in January. You also have 25 states that have filed an amicus brief in support of striking down these concealed carry restrictions. But now the state of Hawaii has filed their response to all of this, and once again, they are arguing that the Supreme Court should uphold these concealed carry restrictions. If that happens, that would of course be horrible for the two-way effort going forward. It would have broad-reaching implications if the Supreme Court upheld these restrictions, and then also it would probably be a huge detriment to all of these states that are currently living under these concealed carry laws, because then nothing would really stop states like California, Hawaii, and others from putting in place even more restrictive concealed carry laws. Now, if you're not aware, this Woolford case is a challenge to Hawaii's new laws on concealed carry, again, that they passed in response to Bruin. This law, like other laws in different states like California, tried to add more restrictions on concealed carry to where essentially, even if you got a permit, it is almost useless because you can't carry a gun lawfully, even with that permit, almost everywhere within the state. Plaintiffs, along with two-way organizations, sued the state of Hawaii to strike down this law, and they received a preliminary injunction which would temporarily block this law from going into effect. Now, Hawaii appealed that decision up to the Ninth Circuit, and the court reviewed that case along with the California concealed carry ban as well. Now, on review, the Ninth Circuit upheld this Hawaii catch-all property ban and reversed the injunction that was issued by the lower court. And even when the plaintiffs tried to get the Ninth Circuit en banc panel to take review of that ruling, the en banc panel in the Ninth Circuit denied review. They did not want to address this, and so essentially that led the plaintiffs with just one option, which was to go to the Supreme Court. The plaintiffs asked for the Supreme Court to step in on an emergency basis, review this interlocutory posture case, and like I mentioned, the Supreme Court did grant review to this case, and now they will hold oral arguments in this challenge on January 20th, and they will rule on this term. Now, one of the critical things that I mentioned that may have led to the Supreme Court taking this case even on an emergency basis was that prior DOJ brief. And once again, the Trump DOJ is jumping in support of this two-way effort. They recently submitted an amicus brief arguing ultimately the Supreme Court should rule that this type of law in Hawaii is unconstitutional, and they're asking for the Supreme Court to allow the United States government, potentially Harmeet Dillon, to participate in those oral arguments and argue on behalf of striking down this law. Now, one of the first things that the US government argues in support of striking down this law is that Hawaii's affirmative consent rule violated the Second Amendment because it was designed purely to suppress concealed carry within the state. They argue that the law in question was not aiming to abide by the Bruin ruling from the Supreme Court. Instead, it has the ultimate and hidden agenda of simply frustrating two-way rights. The ultimate goal of this is to expand upon gun-free zones. It's not about protecting property rights of these owners in Hawaii. Really, ultimately, if the property owner wanted to have no guns at their location, they could do what they were always allowed to do traditionally, which is post a sign, something saying like "no guns allowed." That has been the tradition and history in the United States. But here you have States like Hawaii and California, which are trying to flip that on their head and then put the burden essentially on you to look at the store and see if there's a sign that says that you can conceal carry at that location. Now, after the Trump DOJ submitted that amicus brief, I told you that I believe they would also try to get the Supreme Court to allow them to participate in the oral arguments and argue on behalf of the pro-2A side. That's exactly what they have now done. And now we're just simply waiting for the Supreme Court's answer. On top of the Trump DOJ supporting this challenge, you also have those 26 states that have filed an amicus brief in support of striking down this Hawaii law. But now you have the state of Hawaii who has filed their final response in this case, and they continue to argue that the Supreme Court should uphold this law in the state of Hawaii. And they argue that this law and how it's structured complies with the Second Amendment and also the Supreme Court's recent Bruin ruling. Hawaii argues that its law requiring consent before someone carries a firearm onto private property is fully consistent with the Second Amendment because the Constitution has never protected a right to armed entry without a property owner's permission. In the brief, they also emphasize that since the founding, the right to exclude has been a core feature of property ownership, and they claim nothing in the Second Amendment overrides that principle. In Hawaii's view, the law does not ban carry. Instead, it simply requires permission, which can be given verbally, in writing, or maybe by a sign. And because they state the founding era understanding did not include a right to carry guns onto another's land without consent, the state argues that its statute regulates conduct outside the Second Amendment and outside potentially some of the rulings that the Supreme Court has already issued. They then argue in the response brief that even if the Supreme Court finds that this law implicates the Second Amendment, they believe that it still is constitutional because it fits within a long American tradition in their eyes of firearms regulations requiring consent before entering private property, while you're armed. Hawaii claims that businesses open to the public still retain the right to exclude firearms and that the state is merely clarifying the implied license to enter does not automatically include bringing a gun. Ultimately, Hawaii tries to frame their new law as a balance between expanding public carry after the Bruin ruling while also protecting property rights of those business owners and those locations within the state. Now, of course, all of that is nonsense. And what is interesting with this brief of the state of Hawaii is that they talk a lot about property rights, but they do not directly address how the historical presumption has always been that you can carry at these locations unless the property owner posts a sign saying that you can't carry there, or maybe something like no guns allowed. Hawaii's law, like other states, actually flips that historical approach on its head and makes it so that you cannot carry anywhere unless the sign says that you can carry at that location. Personally, I think Hawaii is going to have a very hard time to justify this law during the oral arguments, and they're going to have a hard time. I think they're going to get a lot of hard questions from the justices about this historical presumption that we've always had and why now Hawaii wants to flip that on its head. And again, these oral arguments are going to take place on January 20th. So this concealed carry case will be huge because it will be another case and another chance where the Supreme Court gets to perform the Bruin text, history, and tradition analysis, and it could also give further guidance to lower courts about how to handle two-way cases and then impact other two-way challenges going forward. So this is going to be huge for the Second Amendment movement. Like I mentioned, this turn, the Supreme Court will once again hear a critical two-way case and rule on it. This one again deals with concealed carry restrictions and laws that were passed in direct defiance to Bruin. And the good news is that we have the Trump DOJ on our side in this case, and then also 26 states that have filed an amicus brief and a lot of other two-way organizations that have filed amicus briefs in support of striking down this type of state concealed carry restriction. So that's what's currently happening in this critical case. As we get more information, as it develops more, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. You can also check out one of the videos here on the screen that the YouTube algorithm thinks that you will find helpful. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.